All righty. It says we are live. So we'll wait for a few minutes while some of our live participants find us. But those that are watching it in after the fact and the saved version, you can go ahead and ask questions as well afterwards. And we will do our best to come back and answer comments that are afterwards as well. So, but this is a fun thing that we've started trying to do some live recordings to try to get some of your basic questions answered. We've done sort of a series on the mid-year reports, and one of the things that we've got questions about is about now what about assigning grades and calculating grades for your homeschool. So that is the topic that we have before us today. And I do see we have some live participants. I see the little eyeballs starting on here. So, you can feel free to say hi and ask us any of your questions, and we'll make sure that we get to them along the way as well. There is always a little bit of a delay, so sometimes we're talking ahead and then we notice the questions later. So it's just the way it works on this live broadcast. But we will go ahead and get started. My name is Kim Andrysczyk. I am the South Carolina Homeschooling Connection, and I blog about resources in South Carolina. One of the great resources that we have is associations, and I have with me several association directors who can help put in their expertise and advice about this important topic on calculating grades. So let's do some introductions and tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience and why, what in education in general, not just in homeschooling too. So we'll get started. Introductions with Hazel.
I'm Hazel Douthit. I'm from At Home in the Lowcountry Homeschool Association. And we started our association in 2007. I homeschooled, a little over 20 years. And we have a program called a teaching coach, which we do with some students. And I do grades for those students especially, but we do encourage grades within our association.
Okay. All right. How about you, Laura?
Hi, I'm Lara Caldwell. I'm the director of the South Carolina Homeschool Accountability Association. I've been the director for about 5 or 6 years now. I am a former public school teacher. I taught middle school math here in the upstate of South Carolina in Greenville County School District. When I had my first child, I decided to homeschool. So she was homeschooled all the way through and is now in college. And then my younger daughter is homeschooled all the way through, but she's a junior in high school.
All right. And thank you also to Michelle. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Michelle Palczewski, the one with the crazy last name that's everywhere.
Now I know how to say it.
Thank you. So I'm the director of Hometown Homeschool Association of South Carolina. We are a new association this year. So it's me and my husband doing it. My husband's my IT guy, and he helps me with everything. I have been in education since 2007, and I've been everywhere. I have experience on the teacher end of things from preschool all the way through college. And then I've also been an administrator at 2 different private schools. And then I also teach college part-time psychology classes. So that's a little bit about me.
Very good. So we've got quite a range of experience and expertise to include in our topic today. So the first thing that we want to know is some of the times when do you need grades and when you don't. The homeschool law says that we're supposed to be doing a semi-annual progress assessment, but does that necessarily mean that you need report cards too? Is that part of what that's saying? So Who wants to tackle that one?
Well, I was going to say for me, for my homeschool, I didn't give grades until my children were in high school. So kindergarten through 8th grade, we just focused on learning, having a love for learning, and just doing. I didn't give them grades. I did the progress report, but it was more, where we were and learning and what we needed to do, not an actual grade. So that's how I handled it from kindergarten through 8th grade. But then in high school, I did start to give grades because that started working their transcript to get into college and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I did basically the same thing that you did.
Mm-hmm.
On our progress reports, we mainly focused on what we had accomplished and what we still needed to accomplish. I did give grades per se, excellent, satisfactory, that sort of thing, but not true grades until actually I started in 7th grade, because I wanted them to get used to numerical grades.
That was smart.
You can start high school level classes in 7th grade. And I did have one of my kids actually started with high school level classes in 7th grade. So I needed a numerical grade to be able to put on the transcript.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And mine each had a class in 8th grade that was high school. So that was about the numerical grade.
How about you, Michelle? Do you have any advice about when you might not need to use grades and when you do?
So my kids are little. They're kindergarten and 2nd grade, and I don't give grades. And I won't be giving grades until high school, similar to Miss Laura and Miss Hazel. With coming from an administration end and a teacher end, the appropriateness of grades would be kindergarten through 2nd grade. They do more of the excellent, satisfactory, or they look at public schools, we know, has the standards. So they kind of base it off of that. If they get X amount of standards that they've mastered, they would get excellent, or, satisfactory, needs improvement, and they kind of factor it all up. And then I would say 3rd grade and above would be the appropriate time for letter grades or numerical grades. And then as when you hit high school, you would need both for the transcript. So high school, I would start grading. That's my plan with my children, just because it is the schools that are going to want a grade on the transcript. And then also upon returning to public school, I know there's a lot of temporary homeschoolers due to the pandemic. And thinking about the return, the schools, that's how they interpret how students are doing. There's really no other way that schools are going to interpret it and assess how your child did in homeschooling besides grading. That's just how it is. So that's something to consider, even if you do have that kindergarten through 3rd grader or 2nd grader, excuse me. And it does vary a little bit. Some schools do have that kindergarten through 3rd grade that they don't do letter grades or numerical grades yet. But just something to consider if you're going to return back, that they're going to want to see that if you had a 1st grader that you homeschooled and now they're approaching 2nd grade and want to enter back into the brick and mortar setting, that they have some report card with a grade just so they can assess it.
It speaks to so they can help place the student.
Yeah. And to assess their abilities.
Grades are how the schools tell us how they're doing with your child's progress. So they like us to translate that back. If you're going back into the system, they want to hear that same kind of language back to them. It's I call it edge-speak. It's the language that they speak. And so we speak grades that way to them. A lot of the schools, though, are this year have lifted, for elementary school, have lifted grades at all. They're going more to a pass-fail kind of a thing. So, just bear in mind that the kids are going all over the place. So it's not that you're just trying to help them understand a little bit about how to place your child. And so using those grades is really the language that they speak, but not necessarily all that valuable for you to know. In reading, we're making an A, and math, we're making a B. Like, you've been working with them every single day. You kind of know who are you telling that to.
And teachers have a class of 20 to 30 students. So they have to give tests because they don't know how every student's doing it unless they do. Whereas you're working one-on-one with your student, so you don't have to have all those grades to calculate at one time.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you're going to work with a student. I've mentioned this to families. I even mentioned it actually in my semi-annual report video. You as a homeschooler have the ability to work one-on-one with your child. Even if you have multiple children, it's still more of a one-on-one setting. And with public school, I remember I had 35 children in one class, and it was just me. So, if like my son struggled so bad with money, and in my semi-annual, I said that. I was very honest. I said, we are struggling with money. We're going to put it aside, revisit it. But if he was in a public school setting and the expectation was to master money by winter break, he would be lost. He would stay lost. He would fail the test. And then he would just continue to stay lost. Right. But with homeschooling, you're not going to move on until that child has mastered it. You might put it aside, take a little break, reevaluate how you're teaching it, but you're still going to always go back. So that's something to think about too when you're grading.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. So one of the things we want to kind of cover is some of the various ways. How do you calculate grades? There are actually a number of different ways that we can come up with grades. And I've used all of them from time to time. I have a background in education as well. I was a classroom teacher before I came to homeschooling. And so, there are ways, and I've seen lots of teachers on how they go about calculating their grades. So, kind of just let's talk about some of those various ways. And of course, like the one that I think of that is the most straightforward is if you have a traditional curriculum and you've got tests, you've got assignments and they're graded, and now I've got all of these graded assignments. How can I come up with a grade out of that? And it's what I really kind of consider more of your, traditional way of calculating grades, which is basically taking an average somehow of it.
Right.
But each of those grades then doesn't necessarily get all equal weight. So there's some variations in there where these ones count more and these ones count less, and other factors of things that you can include in there. So, let's get some stories and advice from that kind of perspective. What do you think?
I know some curriculums actually will have a suggestion in the front. And so some families just choose to follow what they have. I know for my personal homeschool, test and papers, we count twice, and then everything else is once. And that's just how I do it. I know when I taught school, it was, test and quizzes were 40, or tests were 40, quizzes were 20. The rest was, took up the rest. So it's really up to you as the parent, how you want to decide to average that grade and how much things count.
Okay. How about you, Hazel? You've got kind of a traditional graded assignments kind of a setup with your teaching coach program. Is that kind of what you do as well?
That's that is exactly. Erica does most of our grading, but she has it set exactly like you were talking about, where there is trying to remember exactly what it is that she uses, but I think it's 40% on the actual book work, and then a 20% on test. I can't remember exactly, but I believe it's something like that. She actually calculates everything, puts it into a grade book, and I take the grades and look at them and decide objectively whether or not I think they're accurate or not. Talking about before, do I have a student that's turning in work all the time, and they're on time, and everything's looking great? Then their grade may bump up a little bit from what she's actually got on that grade book. Mainly because I also have students that will turn work in late, and it makes it more difficult for not only me, but for their parents trying to keep track of all of it. And so their grades may be basically the same as the other student, but the one that got them in on time, in a timely manner, and have their new work to do in the timely manner will be their grades will be better.
Oh, okay.
And I know some people use a program that's online that grades their assignments for them and then has some
Yeah.
kind of
Mhm.
Yeah.
algorithm that decides for them what the grade is. But see, you could take those same grades and recalculate them and weight them however you want to as well, and come up with another, you know, more accurate, what you feel like is a more accurate representation of your child's work. I know some of them, it's like there's like 5 questions, so if they get all 5 right, it's 100. If they miss one, it's an 80. Well, that's the difference. That's a big difference.
That's pretty strict there.
Right? And the way the grade scale used to be, it was like it was either an A or a C. It was like,
Right.
And so like I'd get people that would turn in grades to me for like if they wanted me to help them format a report card, and they'd be like, this subject's an A and this one's a C. They never had any B's in between there. And I was like, wait a minute, let's figure out a different way to calculate some of this stuff. Not
Well,
necessarily.
They do
right.
definitely need to calculate their grades, though. I absolutely hate seeing grades come into me and every one of them are 100%, because I know that they do not have a perfect child.
Right.
And so they could not have a 100 on every single thing.
Right.
I rarely give a 100.
Right.
Well, one time my daughter, we averaged her grades in geometry and it came out to an A, and she did good, but she wasn't an A student. And we both looked at each other. I said, do you really think you earned an A? And she was like, no. So we bumped it down. I mean, nobody's perfect, you know, so we did give her a B on that. But I will get some transcripts come in with a bunch of hundreds, and I just say, you know, did they really earn that, or are you just trying to show it's an A? And a lot of times they're just trying to show it's an A. So then we adjust it from there.
Right. And our grade scale now is not, if we follow the South Carolina grade scale, it's 90 to 100.
Right.
That's so somewhere in there is an A, and you can still have all A's and have a 90. So, but yeah, I think a lot of times people mix that up because we are, you know, working for mastery, where some people will be like, well, you know, I mean, it's not like, you know, it's not like in a classroom setting where it's like, I'm sorry that you didn't get fractions, we're moving on. And, like you have to keep going back until they master it and get it. Like, and so like, if you're just kind of remediating and redoing, you know, until you get that skill, does that speak to 100? Like a mastery doesn't mean that it's 100 either.
Right.
So how do you guys handle some of that stuff? Do you have a way that you handle it, Michelle?
So with my kids, we're a little bit more unschooler / I don't really label us. But I do use a curriculum for language arts and math, kind of like a crutch, just to make sure I'm covering what I need to be covering. And I look at it. So like with money, we tried it and I marked on the table of contents in the curriculum that it needs improvement. Then when we revisited it and we finally mastered it, I did not give my son, I don't do grades, but I did not mark it as mastery. I made notes and I said that we worked on it and, you know, it was a challenge. So I did give him an S for satisfactory. He did master it, but it took a while. So I look at it more like that, and then I'll average it out and kind of just, you know, if there's a few times that he really just needed improvement, and, you know, I'll give him an S for language arts or math. He does not get, you know, that he's, exceeded expectations, because that would be a fib. You know, I'm being honest, you know, you know, he needs help in certain things, and that's okay, because that's, you know, I've told him even, you know, mistakes are proof that you're trying and you're learning, you know? So I'm honest with his grades. He does, you know, just get the language arts, the S. He's behind me. Moving his head around. So, and he knows. So at the end of language arts for first grade, he did do the whole curriculum. We did make sure that he mastered everything at the end, but on his little report card that I give him, because he likes to get like a little certificate at the end that we completed everything, it was an S. Satisfactory. You've done it. You've got through all the lessons, but there were challenges.
Right.
So I just kind of look at it like that. It is subjective. There's a lot of opinions in it. But but being honest, because the only person in the end of the day, if you're saying, oh, they're doing excellent, all hundreds, all A's, the only one you're cheating is the child. Because if they truly need help and they're truly not mastering it and they're struggling, you know, it's, let's say you say it's an AP class, you know, not AP honors class, and it's not, who's, you know, losing out in the end.
Right.
So just being honest.
Yeah, and sometimes they do earn it, because I've had a lot of students take dual credit classes, and from the college it comes over as 100 or 101. So certainly they earned it, but when every class is 100, that's a little odd.
Yes.
Right. Right. You
One
want
of
to
the ways that I have people ask me about that a lot, where their child is, they say, well, we teach for mastery. And since I think with high school is where we have to concentrate on how to calculate a correct grade. And I would tell them to take all of their grades. If they made a 63 on their first one, an 89 on their second one, and 100 on the third one, then you need to take an average of those 3 grades. And that's what their grade would be, rather than 100 because they finally got it.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah.
I use CTC math with a lot of my kids that I do the teaching coach with, and that's the way it averages their grades. They can attempt the lesson as many times as they want, but it will average their grade in the end.
That's a good way to do it.
That is.
Makes good sense. Absolutely. All right. So that's what you do if your curriculum has more of a, you're following a curriculum, you have graded assignments, or you're grading the assignments for your child and coming up with a grade for each thing. Now, what about if we don't have a curriculum? What if you're more unschool, or you're doing a project-based kind of a thing, or, you know, you're how do we come up with grades for that kind of thing? And so there is also a framework that's called a rubric that they use a lot in schools. Are you guys familiar with any of that kind of techniques? How can we advise our homeschoolers about what that is?
Yeah, you can have it set up to where the student knows in advance, okay, you're going to get an A if you've met all of these things. You'll get a B if you've met all of these things. And so that can give them something to gauge for their A or their B or the C. And you can decide, okay, is it an A because they've done everything I've expected that I've listed here? And if they haven't, then it's not an A. You're going down to the next section in your rubric. And colleges will be set up like that. When they get into college, they'll have something and they'll know exactly what they have to do to earn their grade. So it is a good thing to get them used to. And I do that a lot with writing as well, is my girls know exactly what I'm looking for in their writings, and they know what they need to get an A, a B, or a C, or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Writing is a good one, a good subject that it's hard to get. That it's hard. I'm going to mute her mic. hard to come up with a grade. I was even helping somebody the other day, and she was trying to come up with a grade, but all of her feedback for her child was like, this is not what they were asking. The assignment was write a sentence, and with support, you know, you're writing a paragraph and you've got a main idea sentence, and then you've got supporting details. And she was picking it apart because of grammar and punctuation. And I was like, but let's go back to what the goal of this assignment was. Let's grade her on that and figure out a way. Is that what she's done?
Right.
And so, yeah, you have to have that kind of a rubric sometimes just to keep yourself on track.
Right.
We go into proofreader mode and want to go, well, but this is spelled wrong and this is
right. And so if it's not an English class, you may not want to be tagging for spelling. So you definitely need to know what you're looking for.
Exactly. Yes. That's also important for other subjects too. Yeah. Any other feedback about rubrics, to how that works?
Or what you were addressing? Did you unmute me? Sorry.
I did.
I didn't get off the phone. Sorry. Anyway, what you were saying about her checking for spelling and whatnot, grammar. All of my assignments that were writing assignments, I gave 2 grades. I gave one for content and one for the grammar portion.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So you can separate those 2 things then and have them.
And you've got language arts and you've got history or science.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it can go back and be a second, like this is your rough draft. We're working on the content. Did you do this part of it?
Mhm.
Now let's go back and use this assignment as punctuation and grammar and
Right.
go back and evaluate those things.
Yeah.
As a second grade. That makes total sense.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes. So
I was really listening to you, when this was all going on with my phone.
that's okay. So we've talked a little bit about how to adjust the grades with some subjectivity, but is there really a way to do grades entirely subjectively? Like, in my opinion, I think we're trying to come up with an accurate reflection of your child's accomplishments and abilities, and I call it an educational resume. So when you think of what like a resume is, like I can put on there that I'm proficient in Word documents, but I better be proficient. Like there's nobody else that's saying and evaluating. I suppose there are tests and things out there that I can show my proficiency on those kinds of things, but a lot of places that you just put it on your resume and nobody's questioning that kind of thing. And so I think there is a way to also come up with grades that are essentially like that as well, to kind of say, this is the work that I've done, but it's also kind of a subjective like evaluation that I'm good at this and I'm not as good at this.
Yeah. And like if you're doing PE or art, that's kind of hard to grade. So that would work really well with that, because you don't want to just give 100 because they've done it. Their effort that they put into it or how well it looks could definitely be, oh, that's an A or a B or whatever you choose.
Yeah. We do like since we don't use a curriculum with science and social studies, we do we'll cover a topic, and I'll go back with the mastery. And if my one son can tell me, I'm just going to say all about goats for science. Yeah, he's obsessed with goats. If he could tell me all about goats, if he could do a little presentation on it, if he can, tell me what uses for goat milk. I mean, if he can tell me from A to Z about that animal that we learned about, then I will say that he has done it, and he's an expert in it. But then we'll cover something else. Like they want to cover geology now, and it's a little bit challenging. They've wanted to learn about it. They love to learn about rocks and, volcanoes and all that good stuff, but it's very challenging. So I notate that and just say, we're doing it. We're struggling. Again, we're not an expert. We're not proficient yet. We're a little bit lower than that, but we're doing it. And I just make a note, and I just kind of keep tallying it up and going from there.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah. And some of what I've talked about before about coming up with grades and, using them as a way to be as accurate as possible comes from my experience both in the homeschool world and in the classroom, because I've had experiences where which teachers are going to grade you easier. They're in the same school, but you've got this history teacher and this history teacher, and everybody wants that one because they know they're going to get an A in her class, where they're not going to get it in this other one. And I think the same thing happens, in colleges too. Michelle as her college instructor. Do you know what your rate my professor rating is?
I was that professor that I did have a wait list. And they would ask me, can you do another class at this time? And when I was at the time, I didn't have kids yet. And I was doing, teaching at the elementary school and admin in the morning and teaching classes at college at night or online. And I was one of those teachers that even in the classroom at the elementary school, I made sure that students had an equal opportunity to show their knowledge, because tests there's too many factors that can kind of skew the grades a little bit. Students have test anxiety. You know, we've all been there. We've woken up with a headache. We've woken up, we haven't felt good. You know, maybe they have had a lot of adult students that are working a full-time job and then trying to study and do classes. So my grades were tests. I took into account their testing, their participation on our Blackboard account. If they could have a conversation with me in class, I would make a note and just say, you know, I would divide it up. Tests were this much of the percentage of the grade. Participation was this much online and this much in class. And then I also gave the not parents, well, some were parents, students a chance to write their answers. So sometimes, you know, multiple choice test, there's, you know, we try to make it a little more challenging and throw in a little curveball there, here or there. But with a paper, you can tell me, yes, I know about Freud, or, you know, I know about Pavlov and his conditional, you know, learning and his experiment, but I can't answer the questions on a test. So I tried to touch on each way a learner would, you know, be able to regurgitate the material to me to show me, yes, I understand it, but I'm not a good test taker, or yes, I understand it, but I am not good at writing papers. You know, and doing that, the students liked that because it wasn't just, you know, I've had college professors that just were like, here's your test, and your tests are 100% of your grade. I don't care if you show up or not, but and there was test anxiety, you know. So I was that professor that had a lot of classes. I had wait lists and my name got around the campus, that I was just more of a flexible professor. And I was a little bit more, I know things happen. If you couldn't make it to class, but, you know, tell me something that you learned in the textbook for the reading and I'll give you participation credit, you know, just something. Because I know life happens. So.
And you kind of made me think, because a lot of times you're getting grades from tests or papers, but you could still have a discussion with the child. I mean, you have a lot of flexibility to determine if they know what you want them to know, because my daughters love having a discussion and they prefer a paper. And so that's what we use a lot in our homeschool.
And it depends from subject to subject too. So
I even give papers in math.
Right. Absolutely.
I think it's a lot easier to just have a discussion sometimes because you can't, you know, even just trying to get the words out. Like I try to post different things online and I'm like, this would just be easier to verbally tell you to get my point across. And even when I was teaching at the elementary level and middle school, I would have students, if they did not do well on a test, we would talk about it and be like, okay, well, explain to me, you know, the plot of the story, who are the characters, blah, blah, blah. And if they could tell me it, I'd be like, all right, you know, and we would do a redo. I would adjust the grade a little bit. So
we're all different. So absolutely.
It's hard.
So, do you have anything else to say about any kind of subjective grading that happens? Oh, I can think of one. So like even in like, resource centers that you know, enroll your child in, you know, this resource center, and they're going to teach your child, you think you're going to get really good feedback, but they just give everybody hundreds, you see. And so that, it's not, you know, because I've seen that happen. I've also seen things like what Michelle is talking about, where like my child was a shy child and she didn't volunteer to answer questions in class, but she got a C. And I said, well, why did she get a C? And the teacher said, well, because she doesn't answer questions. I said, well, have you ever called on her? Is she rude about it and refuses to answer, or just says she doesn't know? I'm like, what's going on here? Well, no, she just doesn't volunteer to answer questions.
Oh, no.
Well, if that's what you're grading on, like, give her a chance to answer a question in there. So you know, I've seen where the grades have come to me in a subjective kind of way. So then I have to reevaluate and say, but that's not an accurate reflection of her abilities and accomplishments. And you have to adjust those things as well. So, that's just a Kim story. So do you have any Hazel stories over there?
Oh, you want to hear one of my stories?
Sure.
Well, Skylar was the one that I homeschooled from the very beginning. kindergarten on up.
Mhm.
And he had never gotten a report card. And so one day he came to me and he said, "What is a report card?" And I told him, I said, "Well, you know, they get those in school, and it's to show parents what their student is doing at school, you know." And he said, "Well, I need one." I said, "Why do you need one?" He said, "The man down at the pizza place told me he would give me a pizza report card."
I made one for that reason too.
That's right. Yep.
But he didn't know what it was because we did grades, like you know, handing him a report card or anything like that.
Yeah. Fun. So
You'll also see. Go ahead.
Nope, you go
I was
ahead.
gonna say you'll also see the subjectiveness in grades. Just like I was trying to think of a story while we were talking, and when I first started into the education sector, I was the TA. And just for a short amount of time. And I had this one teacher I worked under, and she was, you know, she did her grades, she did her testing. And if a student got, you know, like an 88, 89, she'd be like, "Oh, I'm going to bump them up to a 90 so they get an A." But then another student would score that same score, and she'd be like, "Nah, I'm not going to bump it up."
Oh no.
And you would have that favoritism, and I'm like, but if you're going to do it for one, you know, but it is. And then you'll have teachers throw extra points for participation, or at the lower elementary level, if they, you know, are a teacher's helper or offer to stay inside for, you know, grade, I don't know, help put stickers on papers. There's some favoritism there. I've also seen the opposite with like they called it something different down in North Carolina, but the special needs students, you had, when they would go to the teacher to get extra help, the teacher sometimes would just be like, "This is A, B, C, D," you know, and it, instead of helping. So the grades would be a little bit skewed there too. And they would just be like, here's 100, you pass, and instead of helping them. So even at the public school level, there's a lot of flexibility with the grading, and I don't think that's and I don't think that's realized by a lot of parents. They think if, you know, that the schools have this rubric and they have to adhere to it, but there's flexibility in there, and teachers bump up, teachers, you know, keep it where it's scored.
Or they'll have extra credit on there that you can do.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So we have one more question. This came from one of the viewers, and she is asking if you have any recommendations for some of the organized grading systems or templates. I don't.
Yeah, I use Excel. That's what I use. Is I just set it up on Excel and then set up the formulas to calculate it. I don't know if anybody else has one.
Yeah, there's probably some programs out there that.
Right.
They're trying, I mean, there's always something they're trying to sell to homeschoolers.
Right.
Do this and it'll simplify your life.
No.
There is one.
Oh, sorry.
We just got to take turns. Michelle, which one do you know of?
There is one. I'm going to try and pull it up while I'm on here with you guys.
Is that you again, Hazel?
I'm a busy woman.
Okay. Well, while she's looking that up, did you have one that you were going to suggest?
Yeah, I was going to. I did the same thing Laura did, but I would suggest keeping it very simple. Don't let it get real complicated. I mean, I've kept little grade books on my computer, and because you don't want to get too overly complicated.
Right.
Mainly, I think sometimes parents, they start homeschooling and they get bogged down in all of the details of trying to keep records and trying to keep grades and all of those things, and they lose sight of why they're actually homeschooling. And that is to educate your child, to teach that child what you want them to know and what they need to know, and you're good. but trying not to get
Contract.
bogged down into just giving grades.
Right.
Right. Remember what grades are for. They're to communicate your child's abilities and accomplishments. And so when do you need to do that? Usually when they're leaving the homeschool. They're going somewhere else. Somebody else needs to see that. That's what we're doing it for. And the law doesn't say that you have to even calculate grades. This is just something that you would want to do so that it opens the doors of opportunity for your child. So wherever they're going, because they can go back to public school without a report card. It's compulsory attendance. They have to take your child, but then they have to guess where to place them. And so that's why I say, why not format a report card and give them a hint. This is where my child is in these subjects, and this is the grade level that they should be placed on. So,
and when they return to public school too, they're gonna get tested. The schools are gonna do. I know in North Carolina we did MAP testing. Yeah, with the public school, and then the private school, being on the administration side, we had our own placement test that we would do. And the child would sit there with one of us on the admin team, and we would assess your child to see where they needed to be. They would still go, and I know this varies a little bit, both in the public school and private school in North Carolina. We placed them where they had to go, where they were supposed to be by age. So, a 7-year-old would go into 2nd grade. And I know that does vary. I've heard different families say different things. But even if they scored, let's say at a 3rd grade level or 1st grade level, they would get their lessons kind of individualized a little bit. They might get pulled out to get more one-on-one with an assistant. The online learning platforms that different schools use can be adjusted to where they are at a little bit.
Absolutely.
And the one school I worked at, it was a public school. The students had a homeroom. This started in 1st grade, and they would change classes, kind of like you would in middle school. So even these little 1st graders, they had their homeroom, and some of the students went to a classroom with a teacher where they were a little bit ahead of 1st graders and knew more of the 2nd grade. And then there were some that were a little bit behind, and they went to a different teacher. And then they're the ones that went right at grade level. So even if your child goes in and they're ahead of the game or, a little bit behind, which with homeschooling, there's no behind, but the school will adjust that. So there's no, fear. And even this year, I've had the same conversation with new families that are like, I don't know, I'm so afraid they're going to go back behind, and I keep having to say the same thing. These children are, first, they're dealing with a pandemic. That's the first thing. But they're dealing with so much uncertainty and lack of structure and schedule right now with the school system. Where I live, I'm up in Ridgeville, and before winter break, all the schools were back in session. They had the option of virtual for, if parents chose it in the beginning. And now I think on the Sunday before they were supposed to go back to in person, the school announced that they were virtual again. So you have this in person, out of person, in person, out of person. And students of all ages, they need structure. They need a schedule. They need the constant. So when schools can safely return to face-to-face, these students are going to return all over the place academically.
Yeah.
We're going to have some that have been in the public school system this whole time that are going to be behind. You're going to have some that have been homeschooled or thriving with the online virtual learning, and they're going to be at grade level and above grade level. And then you're going to have some that are going to be, probably the homeschoolers, because they're getting more of that one-on-one education, that are above and surpassed where they should have been for that grade level.
Right. And we've had the stability all year of saying, this is what we're doing.
We
we're
have
right here.
homeschoolers
Settle in.
We're here. We're going to keep going. And we've had some changes. We're not taking as many field trips and whatnot, but I've had a lot of friends that are still teachers that they're having their staff meetings, and they're like, what are we going to do when these students can safely return? And even the schools don't know what they're going to do at this point. I know I have a friend in New York that they do the end of grade, end of year testing, the Regents exams. And this year they're like, are we doing them? Are we not? What are we going to do? And, nobody knows what they're going to do when they return.
Yeah.
So,
and I think the end of course were already canceled for this year, weren't they, in South Carolina for the high school?
Yeah. I think a lot of things are being canceled, and, children are just kind of going to be progressing through, which then brings up the question of if they're going to push students through, if, little Susie was, struggling really bad with the virtual learning and she doesn't know, what are we going to do to make sure she's up to speed when she goes back?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of uncertainty this year, and I've had to have that conversation of, don't worry, schools don't even know what they're going to do.
Just focus on learning.
Yeah, just focus on, your home, your homeschooling. Your child's getting a one-on-one education. They have the structure. Even if you're unschooling, they have the structure. They're home. You know exactly what tomorrow is going to bring. These students in school, even the schools that are face-to-face, one COVID case and we're closed for 2 weeks. Everything's virtual. These students are not thriving that way. They need that structure. So it is just take a breath. And, these students are, really surviving a pandemic. I mean, I've seen your post about that, Kim, and they really are. This is not normal. This is out of,
it raises a whole lot more questions about how we do school in the first place, and how do we fix education. It's a whole bunch more that we don't have time to talk about.
It does, I know. I am still looking for that template. There was a new program that came out this year, and I don't know the name of it off the top of my head. But,
okay, well, we can drop it in the comments later. So when we get off of here. So but this has been a lot of fun, and I appreciate everybody's input. I think it's a great thing for us to kind of present sort of like a variety of voices. Oh, we lost Hazel again.
She was doing so good this time.
But present all of our voices in kind of a harmonious, unified way, because you'd still want to check with your association to make sure. Here she comes again. Here she comes again.
Sorry,
but we were just saying that you definitely want to check with.
Move my mouse a little bit, it kicks me off.
Don't touch anything. Don't touch anything. So, but definitely check with your associations. Some associations do have very specific policies about paperwork, about assigning grades, and things like that are required. Some that are explicitly, you don't have to assign a grade ever or do a test ever, or so you definitely check with your association for their specific policies. But for the most part, we are a unified front of advisors who will tell you it's up to you. Choose what works for you.
Right.
So, yep. And we're here to encourage you and inspire you, and provide resources to help you keep going, because we think homeschooling's great.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kim.
So, well, thank you. Thank you for
you.
coming and participating with us. Thanks for everybody who watched, and we'll see you next time. This has been Kim with the South Carolina Homeschooling Connection.